We request Dr. Shreerang Godbole to take forward the speech today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At the outset, my pranams and greetings to all the dignitaries and all the people who have assembled on this virtual platform on the occasion of the release of this concise biography of Veer Savarkar. At the outset, I also thank Samvit Prakashan for giving me this opportunity to speak about Savarkar. I think it is very fitting that this concise biography of Savarkar is being published when we are preparing to celebrate 75 years of our independence. And I think this is surely an occasion for all of us to revisit our history, draw lessons from it, and retain all that is eternal. This is also a time when we need to write our history exactly as it happened, shed the colonialist baggage, free it from narratives that have been propagated due to political and ideological compulsions. From childhood, we have been fed with this fiction, in popular discourse, that we won our freedom, without violence, without any sacrifice. De di hame azadi, bina khadga, bina dhal. This is what we have been taught. Now, a nation that is fed on the fiction that we got freedom without any sacrifice, without any violence, all that we did was just some non-violent satyagraha and we got our freedom, can hardly be expected to cherish this freedom and let alone defend it. If truth be told, freedom was won not by pleas or prayers or petitions. It was won largely by the blood and tears of hundreds of nameless revolutionaries and their families who braved British barbarity, faced death, deportation, imprisonment, forfeiture of property. So the fact that we got our freedom, the credit does not belong to a single party or 2 or 3 individuals. It's a collective effort which was launched by the previous generation. You had various streams of the freedom movement, all of them with one single goal in mind, the freedom of the country. Some of them were moderates who assembled, passed resolutions asking for reforms from the British. Some of them belonged to the so-called extremist faction or the nationalist faction. Some of them were doing responsive cooperation with the British, enter the legislative councils and get reforms done. And some, like Gandhi and the Congress under him, practiced non-violence and satyagraha. And then one must not remember the groundwork laid by the heroes of 1857 and the revolutionaries that came thereafter. What had Savarkar himself to say? Why did we get our freedom? To whom should the credit go? In a famous speech in 1952, Savarkar said that the credit for gaining freedom is collective. It belongs to all these different streams of the freedom movement. And not only that, Savarkar said that it is not just people who probably secretly or openly participated in our freedom struggle, whether it was violent or non-violent. Savarkar magnanimously says that even those who had sympathized with the cause of freedom in their hearts, who silently prayed that their motherland should be free, even they should be given credit in that measure. And therefore, if the previous generation has won freedom for us, I think it is the duty of the present generation and future generations to safeguard this freedom and mold our polity in such a way that it suits our temperament, our needs, and aspirations. Anyone who wants to study the history of 20th century India cannot move forward without considering the contribution of Swatantrya Veer Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. However, Savarkar's significance is not merely historical. He continues to be relevant even today and will remain relevant even in the future. If you want to make sense of the current socio-political situation in our country, you have to understand Savarkar's work and philosophy. Savarkar propagated his philosophy, propounded his philosophy under impossibly adverse conditions. This was a man who was ahead of his time. And that is why probably his philosophy did not achieve or gain electoral success in his lifetime. But the true importance, the true relevance, the success of a timeless icon like Savarkar becomes evident only with the passage of time. Who can deny that today it is Savarkar's thought that has come to occupy the center stage of our national life? And therefore, even after his death, Savarkar remains alive in spirit, and you can be dead certain that he will continue to be the focus of debates and discussions, allegations, and even accusations. Now, isn't it a travesty of truth that a selfless patriot like Savarkar should be made a target of a sustained vilification campaign by a section of his own countrymen? So you have a whole gang of assorted Islamists posing as secularists. You have card-carrying members of political parties who pose as academics. You have the left illiberals, you have the pseudo-secularists, and you have mercenary journalists, all united in throwing muck at Veer Savarkar, annually or semi-annually. From time to time, this is an organized, sustained campaign. Now, what these busybodies have in common is the one aim of eradicating Hindutva from this country. In their own words, their sole aim is dismantling Hindutva globally. Now, how do you possibly destroy a civilization which not just survives, but enjoys and celebrates and upholds values in an unbroken tradition of more than 5,000 years? How do you possibly cause death to this Hindu civilization? What you do is, if you want to destroy the civilization, you identify the soul of this nation, and then you look for the ideals for which this nation stands for, and then you look for icons that symbolize these ideals. And if you want to destroy this civilization, you denigrate these principles on which this nation stands. You demean, you denigrate, you demonize the icons that represent this soul of the nation. And the soul of the nation is Hindutva. Without Hindutva, India is not India. And if you want to destroy India, you dismantle or you destroy Hindutva. And if you want to destroy Hindutva, then you attack the torchbearers of Hindutva. And the foremost torchbearer of Hindutva indeed is Veer Savarkar. And therefore, these busybodies who want to propagate their narrative, these interested parties, they wish to propagate a deeply entrenched view of what is Hindutva, how Hindutva, pro-Hindutva individuals and organizations are. However, the problem is that Savarkar refuses to be straitjacketed into any image that these busybodies want to propagate. So, for example, it's a pet theory of these Hindutva baiters, those who want to dismantle Hindutva, that Hindutva forces did not participate in the freedom struggle of our country. And yet, who but Veer Savarkar, the torchbearer of Hindutva, was the Prince of Revolutionaries. Now, who gave this title of Prince of Revolutionaries to Savarkar? It was not some other Hindutva icon. It was the Russian writer Maxim Gorky who hailed Savarkar as the Prince of Revolutionaries. Another chant of these Hindutva baiters is that Hindutva is an obscurantist ideology. It's a backward thought. But all their so-called progressivism pales in comparison to Savarkar's thought and action. Another refrain of this Hindutva baiters is that Hindutva and rationalism are mutually incompatible values. The fact is that they can neither endure nor digest the rationalism of Veer Savarkar. Another favorite claim of this gang is that we have a monopoly in the field of literature, poetry, and drama. But pray, who is that writer who has effortlessly dealt with all the genres of literature, be it poetry, short story, novel, it can be a biography, an autobiography, journalism, it can be purification of language and script. You can, just consider any genre of literature, and Savarkar has contributed to that. So try hard as they may, it is impossible for these Hindutva betas to overshadow Savarkar. Wherever they go, they run up against a man called Savarkar. So what they were doing all this while is to try to erase his memory, not mention him. But they found this didn't work. Savarkar's memory refuses to die. So if you cannot erase his memory, you besmirch his memory. You throw muck at him. And therefore, if somebody wants to really understand the real Savarkar, he has to wade through a lot of muck which has been thrown by these Hindutva betas at him and go and understand the real person. You have to sift truth from the falsehood if you want to understand Savarkar. What sort of a person was Savarkar? If you want to understand Savarkar, don't go by what his detractors say. I will even go so far as to say that don't go by what even I say. Read what Savarkar had to say about himself and his various actions. Form your own opinions. Go to the original sources and decide for yourself. If you throw a glimpse at Savarkar's life, as was mentioned, it's a life that is stranger than fiction. Savarkar became a legend in his lifetime. His personality seemingly has innumerable aspects. So, for example, this is a lifelong patriot who espoused and suffered untold hardship for the cause of India's independence. And not just he suffered, his entire family, his brothers, his own wife, his sister-in-law, his children, all of them suffered untold hardship for the cause of India's freedom. And this espousal of freedom was not something like dominion status or some such halfway. It was complete freedom, which he espoused from his very childhood till the end of his life. Here is a staunch nationalist. And what is his ultimate aim? He's not a narrow nationalist. He's not an extremist. His ultimate goal is welfare of humankind. Here is a critical philosopher who is not just an analytical, critical philosopher, but is a philosopher who works tirelessly for and among the masses of India. Here is a social reformer who is wedded to science and reason. Here you have an epic poet who wrote approximately 9,000 pages of literature in the most trying circumstances on the walls of the prison. This is something that is unparalleled in the annals of world literature. Such an epic poet can well himself be the topic of the subject of an epic himself. Here you have an historian who not only writes history from original sources, but makes history and molds history. Here you have a brilliant writer, as I said, who writes all genres of literature. Here you have an orator par excellence. You can just keep on, you can just continue to describe the various facets of Savarkar. So the question is, why at all should we remember a man who now died more than 50 years back, who lived maybe about 100 years back, 125 years back? Why is it that the nation needs to remember and cherish his memory? The simple fact is, a nation that does not remember and cherish its heroes cannot survive. So certainly it is in the fitness of things that we remember heroes such as Savarkar. However, a sense of gratitude is not the only reason why we ought to remember and cherish Savarkar. Honoring Savarkar does not add to his glory. You know, he is beyond and above all the honors that a country can bestow on him. Even if you give him the Bharat Ratna, I will say he's above that. So Savarkar needs to remember not to glorify him, but because if we forget him, it will spell ruin for us. So it is not for Savarkar's sake that we need to remember, rather it is for our own sake that we need to remember and forever remember him. That the country gains if it follows the path of Savarkar and loses if it does not has been amply demonstrated on numerous occasions. Savarkar was a nation builder who reflected on various aspects that make a nation endure. So whether they are lofty subjects like political science, economics, defense, foreign policy, education, social harmony, history writing, communal relations, language, script. So these can be lofty issues, or they can be seemingly trivial issues like observance of rituals, festivities, jail reforms, national almanac, the importance of exercise, diet. From the seemingly lofty to the mundane, you have Savarkar's thoughts, writings, speeches, and actions that are both thought-provoking, action-inducing. Indeed, Savarkar's contribution to India is so diverse, it is so profound, that the epithet Swatantrya Veer, or hero of freedom, that is applied to him is actually woefully inadequate. Savarkar's personality is so daunting, his contribution is so immense, that it is very easy for ordinary mortals like us to keep him on a pedestal, sing his praises, and salute him from a distance. What we need to understand that we can emulate Savarkar's qualities, even one or two of them in our own small way. Savarkar's life is a shining example that no work in the service of the nation is lowly or insignificant. Here you have an internationally acclaimed barrister, the prince of revolutionaries, and when he is incarcerated in the cellular jail of Andamans, he is teaching the prisoners there to read and write. When World War I breaks out, he writes definitions of politics and economics on the walls of his cell so that some other inmate who might be then housed in his cell subsequently can read those definitions. Here is an internationally acclaimed author who gets up at 5 in the morning in Ratnagiri to teach letters to read and write to children who are ex-untouchables. He teaches them Gita and the Gayatri Mantra. He brings up a girl from the ex-untouchable Mang community in his own house when he's in financial stress. This is the man. He is carrying a cart of Swadeshi goods in the streets of Ratnagiri. So he shows us that you can be highly qualified, you can be internationally acclaimed, but no work that you do in the service of the nation can be insignificant. His motto is nation first above everything else. And that is something which ordinary individuals like us need to emulate. So Savarkar's life is not for admiration. It is not for adulation. It is for emulation. This is something that we all need to understand. Now, for sake of convenience, you can divide Savarkar's life into several phases, and that is for our convenience. These are not compartments. Please understand that. So the first phase of Savarkar's life starts from 1883 and ends in 1905. And this is the phase of his childhood and his youth, where he is born in a small village of Bhagur in Nasik district. And at the age of 11, he composes his first poem. He gives a public speech at the age of 14. And at the age of 17, he takes a terrible pledge before the family goddess, swearing that, like the Chafikar brothers who went to the gallows, he will either embrace death while slaying the enemy to the last, or like Chhatrapati Shivaji, he will place the crown of freedom on his motherland's forehead. This is the pledge he takes at the age of 17. In 1900, at the age of next year, at the age of 18, 19, he starts his revolutionary organization, which espouses complete freedom at a time when it is a daring thing, a gutsy thing to even ask for dominion status. This 18-year-old boy asks for complete freedom. He starts Mitra Mela, and in the next 3 or 4 years, that metamorphoses to Abhinav Bharat. In 1905, this youth, who is now a student of Ferguson College, Pune, organizes the first bonfire of foreign clothes, the first ever bonfire of foreign clothes in our country. And that earns the acclaim of Lokmanya Tilak. And then this phase ends in 1905. The next phase, he has already embarked on the path of revolution. And now with the recommendation letter of Lokmanya Tilak himself, he goes to England, ostensibly to become a barrister, but in reality to work for the freedom of the country. So the next phase starts from 1906 and goes on to 1910. These are the 4 stormy years that he spends, in his own words, in the enemy camp. And what does he do there? He goes to London, and within 2 weeks, he obtains a pass for himself and his friend Harnam Singh to go to the House of Commons and listens to Lord Morley's speech on the finance budget for India. In 2.5 months' time, he has already completed reading 6 volumes of Mazzini's life and writings, and he has already completed a 250-page book on Mazzini with his famous 20-page preface, which was memorized by hundreds of youth in our country at that time. The book gets published. The first edition of 2,000 copies gets sold in 1 month, but before the second edition can get published, the British government bans the book. It's 1907, 50 years of the 1857 so-called Sepoy Mutiny. Savarkar goes to the library of the India office, where he devours all the books on the so-called Sepoy Mutiny and comes to the conclusion that this was not a Sepoy Mutiny, that it was in fact a war of independence. And he completes his book, The Indian War of Independence, 1857, originally in Marathi, but nobody can publish it either in England or in Holland. And so he and his friends write an English version, and then that gets published, but before it can even get published, it is banned. So this is the first time in the history of the world that a book gets banned before it's published. And then numerous editions of this book come in English, in French, in German, in Urdu, Punjabi, Tamil. And who are the publishers of these books? Subsequently, the Indian War of Independence, 1857, who are the publishers? The first publisher is Lala Hardayal. Subsequently, another edition was published by none other than Bhagat Singh. The next edition was published by Netaji Subhash himself. You can see the influence that Savarkar exerted on all revolutionaries, not just in his own time, but subsequently. And then it's 1907. There is an International Socialist Congress in Stuttgart, Germany. Savarkar has already outlined the philosophy of revolution through his book Mazzini. He now designs a flag for free India. He says that free India should be a constitutional democracy. He advocates a republican form of governance for independent India. He designs the flag of free India and sends Madame Kama to unfurl that flag in Stuttgart, Germany. After that, it's time to send his colleagues to France to learn the art of bomb making, which had just arrived in Europe. He sent some of his colleagues to Belgium because that is where the best pistols are made. And that is the time he learns Gurumukhi, Punjabi. He writes pamphlets which are distributed to the Sikh soldiers of the army so that they revolt. And then comes the assassination of Curzon Wiley by Madan Lal Dhingra in London, the capital of the British Empire, the first political assassination of a British officer by an Indian for the cause of India's freedom, 1909. The detectives are all after him. London is no place to live. He goes to Wales. His health breaks down. What does he do in Wales? He starts writing a 200-page Marathi book on the history of the Sikhs. And then things get hot for him in England. He goes to Paris. He completes that manuscript of the history of the Sikhs, but then decides, I have to come back to England. My colleagues are in England. They are being arrested. He comes to England fully knowing that he's going to get arrested. As soon as he arrives in Victoria Station, he's arrested. Then the trial starts. They want to deport him to India because that is where the sedition laws are much stricter. And what does he do? While the boat is docked at Marseille, this is an audacious, a dramatic leap into the ocean. This is a leap that shakes governments. And then he's brought back to India, stands trial over there. At the same time, his trial is going on at the International Arbitration Tribunal at The Hague. This is the first time a trial of a political prisoner in India is carried out at an international forum, at an international court. And that Savarkar's case to this day is quoted when questions of international law and sovereignty come up, even to this day. The case starts in India and he's sentenced to a double transportation for life, 50 years, forfeiture of property. His personal copy of the Gita and his spectacles are confiscated because now they are government property. They are returned to him as a government property. 50 years. And he accepts that sentence with equanimity. Later, he says, I enjoyed those two trials, okay, of 1910. There, that phase ends with that historic leap into the ocean and the double transportation for life. The next phase then begins from 1911 to 1923, where he spends incarceration, first in the cellular jail in Andaman, then for a short while in Alipore jail, and then also in Ratnagiri jail. It is here in this phase that he bravely, defiantly withstands solitary confinement for the first 6 months. And then the harshest punishments that you can think of are reserved for Savarkar. People who say he collaborated with the British, it's a shame. The harshest punishments were reserved for Savarkar. Here was a man who suffered solitary confinement. His cell overlooked the place where they used to hang the prisoners so that Savarkar could see them being hanged to break his morale. But Savarkar refused to work and he received strict punishment at least 20 to 22 times during his time in the Andamans. So it could be being chained to shackles, standing handcuffs, crossbars, yoked to the oil mill, the harshest punishments you can think of. Other prisoners, they would be given milk if they were ill and admitted to hospital. No milk was ever given to Savarkar. He had to subsist on hard chapati and water. For other prisoners, their families could meet them after 5 years. For Savarkar, he met his wife after 8 years in prison. So the harshest punishment you can think of. After about 6 months, people in Andamans, they could go to the outside the jail and settle with their family. This was never done to Savarkar. He was kept in that hellhole for 11 years. Other revolutionaries, Hemchandra Das, Barindra Kumar Ghosh, Sachindranath Sanyal, they were all released. But not a single day's remission or release was given to Savarkar and also his elder brother Babarao. So this is the time he not only maintained his own morale. Please understand, how did he spend his time? He writes, I spent 1 year, contemplating on the 10 principal Upanishads, 1 month per one principal Upanishads. That is how 10 months got over. You can see the level of his, the loftiness. And there he composes thousands of lines of sublime poetry, which get washed out because the walls get whitewashed. So prisoners memorize them. People who don't understand Marathi memorize them. And when they are released, they recite those poems. And that is how those poems get released. This is unparalleled in the annals of world literature. This is the time when he organizes strikes for political prisoners. He agitates for their rights. And he teaches them to read and write. This is the time when he also organizes Hindu prisoners who are subjected to bullying and torture by their Muslim warders and converted. He brings them back. There's a whole chapter on Shuddhi in his famous work, My Transportation for Life. So, and finally, when he's brought to Ratnagiri jail, the conditions are even worse than cellular jail. There he even thinks of suicide, but he maintains his cool. And in Ratnagiri jail, that is where he writes his seminal work, Hindutva. If Savarkar were to only write Hindutva and do nothing else, he would have still become immortal. The work Hindutva continues to be the bedrock of the modern Hindutva movement. All our Hindutva movement, you can trace its origin to this book. It was this book that inspired Swami Shraddhanand, that inspired Vijay Raghavacharya, that inspired Dr. Hedgewar, who used to move around from door to door in Nagpur and popularize this book. Golwalkar Guruji has described this book as a Pathya Grantha, a Shastra Grantha. It's a textbook. It's almost a scripture. So this phase of Andaman and this jail phase ends with this writing of his seminal book, Hindutva, in 1923, The manuscript is smuggled outside. It goes to Nagpur, where among the first people to see it are Dr. Hedgewar. The next phase, from 1924 to 1937, is the phase of internment in Ratnagiri, where he was kept in Ratnagiri because Ratnagiri was a backward coastal district of Maharashtra. No railways, no telephone lines. The British thought that they could shut him away. Okay, no mercy. And here he continues his revolutionary work, but he concentrates because he is prohibited from taking part in political activity, directly or indirectly. So he devotes his energies to social reform. He breaks the 7 shackles that have maimed the Hindu society. What does he do when he goes there? As soon as he goes there, he starts a survey of schools in Ratnagiri and sees where the so-called ex-untouchable children are segregated. He reports this matter to the school authorities and he ensures that now children are no longer segregated. That's the very first thing that he does when he arrives in Ratnagiri. And then the sort of social reform that he undertook seems impossible even today in many parts of our country. So what do you do? What does Savarkar do? He organizes a bhajan of an ex-untouchable Mahar person. The Mahar is the same caste where Dr. Ambedkar belonged to. So a bhajan by a Mahar individual, a bhajan by a person who belongs to the Valmiki community, the so-called untouchables. His bhajan is being organized in the temple. And when the Shankaracharya comes to lay down the foundation stone of his Patit Pavan temple, the Shankaracharya is garlanded by a person from the ex-untouchable community who worships his feet, and the Shankaracharya gives him a prasad from his own hands. Savarkar organizes hundreds of community dining, intercaste dining, which was something impossible to do even in Mumbai, leave alone other parts of India. He organizes get-togethers. He organizes pan-Hindu Ganesh festivals, where he says that the palanquin of Ganesh has to be lifted by people of all the castes, including ex-untouchables, where the kirtan will be sung by a person who's an ex-untouchable. He starts a pan-Hindu cafe in Ratnagiri, where the tea will be prepared and served by an ex-untouchable person. And then in between, because of plague in Ratnagiri, he goes to Nasik. And what does he do there? It's time for Ganesh procession, which we just are going to see tomorrow. There was a dispute in Nasik. Who should lead the Ganesh procession? Savarkar brought all the communities together and he insisted that the first Ganesha which will lead the procession will belong to the ex-untouchable Mahar community. That will be followed by the Ganesha from the ex-untouchable Kathiawadi Mehtar community. That will be followed by the Ganesha of the Dhanagar or the Shepherd community. And then subsequently the Ganeshas of other communities will follow. In 1931, Savarkar starts the pan-Hindu Patit Pavan Mandir, the first pan-Hindu temple in the whole of India. Starts in Ratnagiri. The rules of the temple say that the executive committee members, the trustees of this temple, compulsorily should belong to all the castes, including ex-untouchables. Any Hindu who has taken a bath can go directly to the sanctum sanctorum. Any Hindu from any caste, ex-untouchable, whatever, if he's well-versed in rituals, he can become a priest at that temple. For the circumambulation of the temple, all the people from all castes should be able to do that. This is the sort of social reform that Savarkar carried on in Ratnagiri. And in a small room, which was meant to be a granary, he writes the history of the Marathas with a small lamp to give him light. He writes 2 plays, which are based on social reform. He works incessantly for the purification of language and script, and so many words that we use today, we don't even know that they have been coined or popularized by Savarkar. It can be Sansad, it can be Doordarshan, Duramudrak, Nepathya, Digdarshak. So many words, literally dozens and dozens of words have been coined by Savarkar or popularized by him. This is the phase of his social reform that ends in 1937 when he is given unconditional release. And when he is released, it's not because of any favor by the British government. It is because the Dhanji Shah Cooper ministry had fallen, and as a condition to join that ministry, Barrister Jamnadas Mehta said, you first have to release Savarkar before I join the ministry. That is why they had to release Savarkar. And that is the phase from 1937 to 1947, which is his political phase as president of the Hindu Mahasabha for 6 consecutive occasions. He does his politics and he says, Hinduize all politics and militarize the Hindus. And that is where he has to deal with not just the British, but he has to deal with the vagaries of Gandhi, Nehru, and the Congress, which is steeped in non-violence, which is preached only to the Hindus, one-sided non-violence, extreme non-violence. He has to deal with them. He has to also deal with Muslim League. There are only 2 tall leaders, the tallest of the leaders of our country, who never joined the Congress. One is Veer Savarkar, the other is Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. This is the time, 1937 to 1947, which is his political career, you can say, and his lone fight, his unsuccessful, but his lone fight for Akhand Bharat. Till the very end, he fought tooth and nail for a unified India. Then comes the freedom in 1947, and then 1947 to 1966. That includes his very unfortunate and shameful arrest on the false charges of being a conspirator, a co-conspirator in the murder of Mahatma Gandhi. No less a person than the law minister himself, Dr. Ambedkar, told Savarkar's counsel, L.B. Bhopatkar, that there is no case against your client. The evidence is just concocted. The whole cabinet is against the decision to frame Savarkar. But even Sardar Patel could not go against that decision. It is all because of the adamant attitude of one individual. He did not name the individual, but you can guess and you know who it was. And then Savarkar is imprisoned on this false charge. And then the trial court acquits him. And the government dare not go to a higher court in appeal. Savarkar is acquitted, and yet you have these detractors in supreme contempt of the court decision saying that Savarkar is responsible for the Gandhi assassination when the courts have exonerated him, and when your Nehru government doesn't go in appeal to a higher court, yet you continue with that slander. And then the second imprisonment in 1950, imagine being imprisoned twice in independent India by the Nehru government. The second time was for 3 months in 1950. When Prime Minister Liaquat Ali of Pakistan was to come to India. So they said that this old and ailing man is going to create problems for us. So put him in jail. So imagine Savarkar in jail for 3 months when Liaquat Ali comes to India and talks with Nehru. Okay, and then he's released. On what conditions? The so-called Democrat in Nehru, what conditions does he apply? He says that Savarkar cannot take part in political activity. Oh my dear, Savarkar has started practicing politics when you are making fun and frolic in England. And now you're asking Savarkar to not participate in the political activity for 1 year or till the general elections. Savarkar is old and ailing. He accepts that. He comes out because his health is failing. And then he devotes his time to other issues of social importance. He gives various warnings and prophecies to the government. He offers his services to the new republic. He writes a letter to Dr. Rajendra Prasad offering my services in the service of this nation. And what does the nation do? It doesn't invite him to the Republic Day celebrations. All India Radio blacks out his poems. There's a blackout on Savarkar. Okay. And then Savarkar in 1952 dissolves his Abhinav Bharat. He says that in a free India, in a democratic India, there is no place for revolutionary organizations. You may have the fiercest of political differences, but all of them must be limited to the ballot box. Savarkar is a great Democrat. He's a great humanist. And then in his old age, he narrates the 6 glorious epochs of Indian history. And finally, then in 1966, he embraces voluntarily death in the highest tradition of yoga after doing a fast unto death, leaving food, then water, not even vitamin drops for 3 weeks before he embraces death. Now, when I say various phases of Savarkar, please understand these are not watertight compartments. So please don't get the wrong impression that he carried out his social reform only from 1924 to 1937 in Ratnagiri. No. Even as a teenage boy, at the age of 19, one of his earliest poems is on the sorry plight of child widows, where he says that their lot has to be ameliorated. The 19-year-old boy is saying that. And he says that they should be an opportunity to remarry. In 1920, when in Andaman, he writes to his brother, saying that just as I felt that I should rebel, against the caste system and untouchability inside India. I felt like doing that, just as I felt like rebelling against the British who were dominating from outside. So this frontal attack on the caste system, on untouchability, started at a very young age. His penchant for social reform is lifelong. So indeed, you can see that there are certain common inspirations, impulses, and influences that pervade all the phases of Savarkar's life. It's a unified life. And what are those unifying influences? I think there are fourfold. One is freedom. One is Hindutva in the broadest possible sense that you can think of, rationalism, and finally human welfare. These were the guiding and the abiding principles of Savarkar's life. Savarkar's favorite axiom was Varam Janahitam Dhyayam Kevalana Janastutihi. Not public adulation, but public welfare alone should rule our actions. Savarkar lived by what he said. He turned his back on popularity, on power and pelf. He embraced anonymity, disgrace, which was sought to be heaped on him by the powers that be. But Savarkar cannot be erased. You cannot forget Savarkar. You cannot ignore Savarkar. You can have your difference of opinion with Savarkar. And Savarkar is a true Democrat. He welcomes differences, but you can't ignore Savarkar. Now you can understand that it is impossible to describe such an eventful life in 100-odd pages. It is simply not possible for everyone to read and grasp the voluminous literature that Savarkar has left behind for us. There are so many well-referenced books written in thesis style, very recently also, which have come out. But the sad fact is they are usually read only by scholars. So what is necessary is a book which is a medium-sized book, which should be solid in facts. It should capture the essence of Savarkar, but at the same time, it should be very easy to read by ordinary people and especially by youngsters. And that was the intention with which my father, late Dr. Arvind Godbole, who was himself intimately associated with Savarkar and with Savarkar's thought, who decided to write a Marathi book in 2005 and wrote a 90-page Marathi book. Now that this English translation is being released, it will be now available to a much wider audience because Savarkar does not belong to any single province or any single language or any single caste or any even single religion. He is a person who transcends all boundaries. And I therefore compliment Samvit Prakashan for publishing this English translation so that it can be available now to a much wider audience. Rajaram Atreji and I have made all efforts to see that this translation doesn't read like a translation, it rather reads like an English original. I hope we don't disappoint you. I request all of you, I urge all of you to buy this book, read it yourself, disseminate it to your friends and near and dear ones. Let us all strive to live by the ideals that Savarkar stood and worked for. Om Shanti.
Dhanyavad, Sreerang ji. I think Dhanyavad would be a very short word for having transported all of us to the world of Savarkar in such a short duration. So I'm sure all of us are having that moment of being transported to the world of Savarkar. We originally planned to have a Q&A, but I think the very talk itself covered everything. And we have a paucity of time as well to take questions now. But nevertheless, any one or two questions from anyone, we request you to post it in the chat box and Dr. Sreerang ji can take it. We'll probably have one or two maximum questions to be taken and then we'll conclude the event for the day. So any questions from any of the participants, please use the chat box to write down your question and paste there. Or even you can raise your hand and the admin can allow you. Okay, there is the first question from Sri Praveen. What is Hindutva according to Savarkar ji? And then we have the second question. Any thoughts on why this antipathy to Veer Savarkar? So I think we have a couple of questions already. Sreerang ji, I'll take a pause here. Probably if you can take those two questions, we'll conclude that after the speech. Yeah. Sorry, you're on mute, Sreerang.
You're on mute, Sreerang.
Oh, you have an audio issue?
Can you unmute?
Now you have unmuted me. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
So the question first, what is Hindutva according to Savarkar? So of course you need to read that whole book. It's not a very large book. It's difficult to answer this question in a few lines, but I'll just attempt. The first thing Savarkar says that Hindutva is distinct from Hindu Dharma. Okay. So in fact, Hindu Dharma itself is a very wide concept, but Savarkar says that Hindutva, the closest translation that you can do for Hindutva is Hindu-ness. So it's more wider than Hindu Dharma. It embraces all the departments.
I think we've lost.
So yeah, I think I've joined. Can you hear me?
Yes,
can you hear me?
Please proceed.
Yeah. So he says that Hindutva is distinct from Hindu Dharma. It is even more wider concept than Hindu Dharma. And then he goes on to define a Hindu. And he says, I won't now give you the Sanskrit verse which he's used to describe a Hindu. But in short, he says that he whose fatherland and holy land extends from the river Sindhu to the seas. Sindhu Sindhu Paryantaha, Yasya Bharata Bhumika, Pitrubhu Punyabhushchaiva, Savai Hindu Riti Smutaha. He whose fatherland and holy land extends from the river Sindhu to the seas is a Hindu. That is what he says. And therefore he says that the term Hindu includes the Sanatanis, the Arya Samajis, the Jains, the Bauds, the Sikhs, the Lingayats, the Bhils, the Santals, everyone, because they have the fatherland and holy land as India. Okay. And then he goes on to explain what makes a nation. You know, then he goes on to describe how Hindus have their commonality of language, of race, ethnicity, of culture, fairs, festivals, heroes, history, a common tradition. That is why the Hindus become a nation. And in fact, Savarkar's definition of Hindu is implicitly now accepted by the Constitution of India, where it enforces, it uses the term Hindu as in the Hindu Code Bill. It is exactly what Savarkar has said. So Savarkar's definition is today constitutionally valid. Okay. I hope I could answer that question at least briefly, but I encourage you to read the whole book. The other question was from Dr. Jayesh Mehta from Chicago, and he asked me, any idea why this antipathy towards Savarkar? So I told you, Jayesh, that Savarkar is the torchbearer of Hindutva, and Hindutva is the soul of this nation. So those people who are interested in destroying this nation will first have to destroy Hindutva. And if they have to destroy Hindutva, they have to demean, denigrate, demonize all the icons who stood for Hindutva. Imagine if Savarkar was not someone who propounded Hindutva. Would they have applied the same standards? No. They are running down Savarkar for the simple reason that he espoused Hindutva. I'll give you an example. Now, Savarkar is accused of peddling the two-nation theory. Completely false and mischievous. Now, look at the double standards. In his book, Pakistan or Partition for India, Dr. Ambedkar says in 1946 that the Muslims are a separate nation. As early as 1929, Dr. Ambedkar again says in his Bahishkrut Bharat, its original Marathi, when the Nehru plan was there, that the Hindus and Muslims are two nations side by side. Now, please understand, stating a fact does not amount to its endorsement. Okay, they are only stating facts. The Muslims consider themselves as a separate nation. They say we are a supranational ummah or ummat, a worldwide sort of a community of believers. It's not Savarkar Ambedkar who says that. But you start accusing Savarkar of peddling the two-nation theory, but you dare not utter a word against Dr. Ambedkar. Please understand, both are scholars. Both have the highest regard for each other. Both are scholars of Islam. Both never joined the Congress. And both are saying, they're just stating a fact They are just stating what the Muslims consider themselves. So the reason why you have antipathy towards Savarkar is that he is the torchbearer of Hindutva, period. You want to destroy Hindutva, you denigrate Savarkar.
Thank you, Shreerang ji. I think that brings us to the end of this event today. There are a few more questions, but due to the paucity of time, we will conclude here for the day. I'm sure it was an invigorating introduction to the world of Savarkar through the speech of Dr. Shreerang ji. A couple of instructions for all of those who have joined. The book is available at HindueShop at a discounted price as a pre-order. The link is posted in the chat box. So everyone who would like to buy the book can avail this pre-order offer from HindueShop. And the book will shortly be listed in Amazon and Flipkart as well to order it. And we can avail it from these two websites as well. It has also been translated and available in Telugu as Savarkar Samunnata Viktitvam. Sri Ayeshji is showing the book as you can see, and that is also available on HindueShop. It is the same book, a translated version in Telugu. So Telugu reading people can avail this and buy this from HindueShop. We will now conclude this Karikram formally with the Shanti Mantra by Sri Ravi Teja.
Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhave. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for participation today. You can visit samvitkendra.org and the Facebook page of Samvit Kendra for more updates and report of this event over the next couple of days. Thank you and have a good day, everyone. Namaste.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.